So when Trump's sanctions hit, the Kremlin panicked. They really did. And Dmitriev was sent to the United States for a charm offensive, and he's been there. And I've been kind of unpacking some of his lies. I'm going to unpack more of them and show you, just expose what he's saying and why it's just not true. But we're going to start here. This is Sir William Browder saying the fact that Putin dispatched Kirill Dmitriev to Washington within minutes of the U.S. sanctioning Lukoil and Rosneft shows just how rattled Putin is. When I use the word panic, I don't use it lightly. They're rattled. Going after oil is a direct hit in the parlance of Battleship. If you remember the game Battleship, it was this children's game from the 1970s and 80s where you'd say J3 and you put the peg in J3, miss, D1, hit. And if you hit the entire ship on the board, you say, you sank my battleship. Okay, so that's the background there. So meetings between Russian President Vladimir Putin's special envoy for investment and economic cooperation, Kirill Dmitriev, and U.S. officials will continue on Sunday in the United States. But in the meantime, he's been spewing his own special brand of propaganda. Now, this is Mikhail Khodorkovsky. Mikhail Khodorkovsky is a Russian dissident who was jailed by Putin, and he understands what's really at stake here. Timothy Milovanov says, Putin only understands the language of force. You must talk to him like a 1990s bandit, says ex-oligarch and former Putin prisoner Mikhail Khodorkovsky in the Washington Post. He urges Trump to arm Ukraine with tomahawks, not fiddle with weak sanctions. But these weak sanctions, weak as they are, they're actually getting an effect. Like, there's a reason that Putin sent this guy to go say these things. Now, here's something I haven't showed you about what he's saying. It's really bizarre. Listen to this.
But what is happening there is that people say things that they know cannot happen. So people say, no, Russia has to completely withdraw.
So they set it up to fail.
So they set it up to fail.
Okay, first, let's deal with part one. Laura Logan is doing a terrible job as a journalist. She should be questioning, pushing back, challenging, and she's going, oh, yes, I see, right? But this whole idea that he's talking about, that the Ukrainians are just taking a hard line. They know that this isn't going to work. They're setting themselves up to fail. The Russians are doing exactly that, and they're blaming the Ukrainians for what the Russians are doing.
This expression, I'll use it in the future. So they set it up
tactic
to fail, and with that, they really do great injury to Ukrainian people because they leave unrealistic expectations and prolong the war. And I think
that's exactly what the Russians are doing. They're asking for maximalist demands and accusing the Ukrainians. It's really bizarre to watch. Here's Jake. He was on with Jake Tapper yesterday, and here's what he had to say. And so I want to preface this with, like, Jake is kind of introducing things, and then he's going to get to a place where he's talking about the bombing of the kindergarten, and he's denying it. It's bizarre.
President Trump has said in terms of his frustration with Putin. He told a story before the Alaska summit about how he told his wife, First Lady Melania Trump, about how a good conversation he had just had with Vladimir Putin. And then Melania said something along the lines of, oh, well, Russia just bombed a nursing home. And this revealed the disparity between the words that Vladimir Putin says to President Trump and the actions. Can you understand why President Trump is frustrated?
Now, that's a good question. I'm no fan of Jake Tapper, but that's a good question. That's what a journalist is supposed to be doing, not whatever Laura Logan was doing.
Well, first of all, I think Russian military, and I'm not a military guy, I'm focused on economic and investments, as you know, but the position of Russian military is they really hit only military targets. And by the way,
did you just hear that? He said they really only hit military targets. Bold-faced lie. It's misinformation. And it's like, if they just keep repeating it, it's like they think that we're going to believe it.
That's very different from some of the wars fought around the world where many more civilian casualties are happening. So I think only now all of the complexities of the conflict are emerging. I think it's very important to have the right narratives and understand that, for example, lots of Russian-speaking people in the Donbass region.
Complexities, narratives, Russian-speaking people who are oppressed. He's just like machine gunning these points. But he just denied that they target civilians. They targeted civilians today. I'll show you that in a moment.
We actually actually originally attacked by Ukrainian forces in the beginning. So I think we all want this conflict to be finished diplomatically. I think we are finding those compromises that would work for all of the parties. And I do understand some of the frustrations, but I think there's also quite a bit of misinformation about what's going on. So thank you, Jake, for having me to at least share some part of the Russian position.
Well, Sue, with all due respect, I mean, I've been to Ukraine since the war began, and it's not only military targets. I've seen apartment buildings that were flattened. Just earlier this week, a kindergarten in Kharkiv was bombed. I mean,
good on Jake Tapper for following up and not letting them just kind of use that word salad to distract.
it is not true that Russia is only targeting military targets. There are civilian targets throughout Ukraine that are being targeted.
Well, of course, Russia is not targeting kindergartens. And,
Again, he lied a second time that they're not targeting civilians. They did. It was a double tap. It couldn't not be a target. Like you don't double tap accidentally.
Needs to be asked about the specific situation, but there is lots of unfortunate, and by the way, any casualty is a huge tragedy, and this is why we want to finish this conflict as soon as possible.
So why not agree
Russia's
to a
position
ceasefire?
is that military targets
Did you hear him? He said, why not agree to a ceasefire? And he just blew right past him.
Sometimes Ukrainian air defense rockets, hit their targets. But again, it's not my area. I'm not a military guy. I'm just working to have dialogue and make sure that the conflict is ended as soon as possible.
Okay,
President Trump
so
has
he said absolutely nothing of any real value there. And yeah, okay. I mean, that's terrible. If you want to know whether there was actually something that happened, this is how we know. Look at this. This is the mayor of Kyiv talking. He says, sadly, 3 people died from smoke inhalation. This was just this morning. Due to a large fire, 29 people have sought medical assistance. Now, and he also talks about earlier than that, talks about how there were 100 buildings or 100 apartments that were affected by this. About 100 apartments need relocation. That was just today. Apartments are civilian apartments. That's attacking civilians. It's just bizarre. And now here's Solovyov, who's going to say, sure, we need to do more attacking civilians. In war, it's not about who's right or wrong, says Solovyov. It's about the relentless will to fight. So I'll say it again. We're finally going all out. There will be no life in Kharkiv, Poltava, Mykolaiv, or Odessa. In these cities, and Kyiv won't exist if people don't realize they're expendable. All right, so, I memean, there you have it. There you have the real image or the real understanding of what's actually being said. And by the way, going back to this earlier point about, because it slipped through, he talked about who attacked who in the war in Donbass here. If you listen to Dmitriev a little bit longer, he'll talk about that. The war in Donbass began when Russian paramilitary and pro-Russian separatists seized towns, because Dmitriev in one of those clips goes on and says, oh, because those Ukrainians, they attacked these Russians. That's not it. Now, he also talked yesterday, and I'm not going to play this again because we talked about it yesterday. I think we all care about our family. Well, maybe we'll play it again. Just listen to the first 20 seconds.
Yeah, but Russia is actually quite a religious country.
Yes.
So if you go, and I hope you can go to our Orthodox churches, etc., it's a very religious country and very much focused on values. So
No, it's not. And so let's push back more against this, because I did this yesterday, but there's some commentary said, Russia's so pro-family, it sent millions of our relatives to the gulag against their will. Russia's so pro-family, it kidnaps thousands of Ukrainian kids against their will. Russia's so pro-family, Vladimir Putin has kids out of wedlock with mistresses. Right. And the hits go on. Here, Branislav Slanchev, the professor from University of California, San Diego, that I did that interview with a couple weeks ago, posted this. Russian military blitz is aided and abetted by absolutely clueless Western media. That's exactly right. I mean, they should have been pushing back. Jake Tapper on CNN did. Laura Logan didn't. only 6% of Russians attend church regularly, and 15% say religion is very important. I showed you numbers that said 11%. So that's somewhere between the 6 and the 15 here. So 11%. And then somebody pushed back in the comments and said, hey, and 33% by contrast of Americans go to church at least every 2 weeks or something like that. I think that's what the figure was. Somebody said, well, I think that number is very high. It's like 2% where I am. And I think this was an American speaking. That may very well be true in certain pockets. In a state where I live is about 50%. So that 33% is about right when you can, even that out. Okay. Russia is actually among the least religious, even among the former Soviet republics, let alone Orthodox nations. Russia has among the highest divorce rates in the world. It's so bad that politicians are seriously proposing finding divorcees or sending them to the front in Ukraine. Well, that would be a convenient way of getting manpower, wouldn't it? The Russian government has decriminalized domestic violence by reducing first offense family battery to a fine or short detention. So domestic violence against women is very widespread. Abortion rates are very high by global standards. The decline is driven by government coercion. Again, item after item after item. No, you're not really conservative like we think of in terms of conservative, right? You're in a very, very different place, but he's trying to use the same words to communicate something different. The Kremlin is extremely worried about the declining population and is trying to force people to have more kids. So while they're not pro-life because they care about human life, they're anti-abortion because they want to have a bigger army in 20 years, if that makes sense. This limited access to contraceptions has banned child-free propaganda. They have even started paying schoolgirls money to have kids. These incentives were previously offered to college women, but are now paid to high school girls too. About the only thing where there's some kind of alignment is active anti-LGBTQ measures, but that's it. The Russians are quite secular in their society. They also happen to have a lot of problems that seriously erode any claim to family values. The government is consistently lying about it. And here he cites all of his sources here, which is one of the things I appreciate about him. And then if we just look at this chart here, this one here, former USSR, fewer Orthodox in post-Soviet republics say religion is very important to their lives, right? Where is Russia in that? Wow, they're kind of low, right? So, yeah. And then Jay and Keith posted this. Funny how a nation of Christian conservative values, which is what they claim to have, which is not what they actually are, continues to expand the jailing of Christians. What are we talking about? Here's in Euromaidan Press, 70-year-old Crimean Jehovah's Witness convicted of organizing an extremist organization for practicing her faith. Jehovah's Witnesses, these are the guys that will come to your door and knock on your door and then, ask to have a conversation about the Bible because they want to convince you about. Now, I'm an evangelical Christian. I'm not a Jehovah's Witness. I disagree fundamentally with some points of their doctrine, but they have a right to practice their religion as they see fit, just like I do. And so as much as I think they're wrong and they might think I'm wrong, that's okay. We can think each other's wrong, but jailing them because as an extremist organization, yeah, that's where Russia is. Putin and Stalin. I'm going to leave you with this last little gem. Putin and Stalin named Russia's greatest leaders according to a new RAS poll. Huh? Okay. So survey by Russia's Academy of Sciences Institute of Socio-Political Research, Putin topped the list with 65%, a record high. In 2000, only 12% viewed him positively, and in 2018, it was 54%. After the invasion of Ukraine, the figure rose to 60%. Yes, this is how Putin gins up his poll ratings by invading other countries. Stalin ranks second with 45% approval rating, a historic peak. You know how many millions of Russians Stalin killed? Of Russians, I don't even mean people from outside Russia. Over the past 9 years, positive assessments of his role have risen from 31% to 45%. Sympathy for Nicholas II, 16%. Brezhnev, 24%. At the bottom of the ranking are Mikhail Gorbachev with 59% and Boris Yeltsin, 56%, viewed by most Russians as most harmful. Like those were the ones that eased them into a soft landing from when as communism was falling apart, and they're viewed as most harmful. But Putin and Stalin are seen as the most the MVPs of the Russian government. Okay, now what's interesting about this is also that there are about 112, 120, something like that, statues to Stalin in Russia, and 100 plus of them went up during Putin's time in office. Isn't that interesting? Okay, before I get to the last little bit, so let's look at Putin's ratings. Where Putin's approval ratings went up, look at this chart, right? See how it goes up here, right? Right here. 2014. What happened in 2014? And then it jumps up again here. Where? 2022, early 2022. How about those apples? Isn't that amazing that that's actually what's taking place? My shout out is to Michael Cabrera, undergraduate Patreon member. Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate your support. And I'll leave you with this by Darth Putin. We were talking about Battleship, so I'm dusting this one off. This was from October 16th. Remember that sub that had a surface near England? Because, or I should say Britain, near Great Britain, because it had its problem. Day 329 of my 3-day war, this war has left the Russian Navy with submarines that can't sink and ships that can't float. I remain a master strategist. All right, my friends, that's all that I have for you in this video. Tell me what you thought about what you saw here. The Russians really are panicked. They are really nervous about it. And sending Kirill Dmitriev to spread these misinformation talking points is a sure sign of that. Thank you for the likes, the shares, and the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.